Welcome to today's discussion. I'm Chad Wolf, the former Acting Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security and Chairman for the Center of Homeland Security and Immigration at the America First Policy Institute. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and this is an issue that deserves much more attention than it receives in today's news cycle. Human trafficking in its many forms is far more prevalent than many think and is extremely lucrative, with an estimated $150 billion in annual global profits. The forms of exploitation, sex trafficking, forced labor, and domestic servitude that constitute human trafficking are antithetical in every way to the principles of human dignity that Americans hold dear. Now more than ever, it is important to speak about this practice and discuss ways to combat it, which is why I'm extremely excited to have a fantastic group of folks here with me today to discuss what was accomplished during the Trump administration, what actions the current administration should be focused on, what part states can play in this effort, and what individuals. Welcome to today's discussion. I'm Chad Wolf, the former Acting Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security and Chairman for the Center of Homeland Security and Immigration at the America First Policy Institute. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and this is an issue that deserves much more attention than it receives in today's news cycle. Human trafficking in its many forms is far more prevalent than many think and is extremely lucrative, with an estimated $150 billion in annual global profits. The forms of exploitation, sex trafficking, forced labor, and domestic servitude that constitute human trafficking are antithetical in every way to the principles of human dignity that Americans hold dear. Now more than ever, it is important to speak about this practice and discuss ways to combat it, which is why I'm extremely excited to have a fantastic group of folks here with me today to discuss what was accomplished during the Trump administration, what actions the current administration should be focused on, what part states can play in this effort, and what individuals can do themselves. So I'm happy to say that I'm joined today by Pam Bondi, who is co-chair for the Center for Law and Justice at AFPI. Pam spent 18 years as a prosecutor and served as Attorney General of Florida, where she pioneered state efforts to combat human trafficking. She also served on President Trump's Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission. Matt Whitaker is also a co-chair of the Center for Law and Justice at AFPI. Matt previously served as Chief of Staff to the Department of Justice and Acting Attorney General in the Trump administration. Earlier in his career, he was appointed U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa by President Bush. Tanya Gould, who is joining us remotely, runs a nonprofit that is dedicated to providing support to survivors of human trafficking like herself. She is a member of the National Survivor Network and a consultant for DOJ's Office of Victims of Crime, DHS's Blue Campaign, and Global Centurion. Tanya advised me at the Department of Homeland Security, and she was a member of the United States Advisory Council on Human Trafficking in our administration. Thank you all for being with us today to discuss this important issue. Matt, let me turn it over to you to discuss some of the actions the Department of Justice took to combat human trafficking while you were there and while you were serving, as well as just to get your overall views maybe on what occurred during the Trump administration during the 4 years and the importance that not only the president put on human trafficking, but all members of his administration put on human trafficking, and then kind of compare and contrast that a little bit to what we see over the last maybe 11, 12 months of the Biden administration.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me today. It's good to be with some great colleagues and friends. First of all, as a former federal prosecutor and also as Attorney General, I saw firsthand, as you did and as Pam did as well in her role in Florida, how evil these organizations are that move people almost, in servitude, in chattel. It's modern day slavery, and we saw Mexican cartels, especially, that were trafficking these women and children across our southern border, sometimes within our heartland. I saw it as far up as Iowa, where I'm from. And so, this is something that has, I think, again, as human beings, we owe to our fellow human beings the importance and the priority of attacking these cases and especially these organizations. And what I see out of the Biden administration is nothing, really nothing of substance. I don't see any efforts. They've announced that human trafficking is a priority, but they've also, prioritized airline passengers and school parents as priorities for prosecution as well. So I don't take their priorities very seriously, especially without the actions that we saw out of the Trump administration. And President Trump was so adamant about this. He issued a executive order to the Department of Justice for us to dismantle these organizations, and he also, made sure that he issued some directives on the online trafficking and the online marketplaces where some of this was happening. And at the Department of Justice, we dismantled, for example, Backpages, which was a website that was, notorious for human trafficking, prostitution, and all sorts of illicit conduct. I think the other thing, when you can talk about where we put the action, but we put money behind this. I think in 2020, the Trump administration issued about $100 million, maybe $101 million worth of grants in this area. They also had the first ever White House summit on human trafficking in January of 2020. And it's just been a real extraordinary prioritization of these cases. And I was proud, both as a federal prosecutor and as Attorney General, to really put people and money behind these cases and to actually prosecute them. And we're just not seeing that out of President Biden or the Biden administration.
So I would agree with you. Obviously, from my time at DHS, working with the Department of Justice and having you guys prosecute a lot of these cases is critically important. From DHS's perspective, using our Homeland Security investigators, we were the ones investigating these crimes alongside a lot of DOJ and other prosecutors. And so let me just pick up, though, on what you said is we talk a lot about human trafficking coming across the border, right? Yeah. Coming into the United States. But you made the point of it's everywhere. It's not, it obviously just doesn't stay on the border. A lot of these crimes and the exploitation of a lot of these individuals, it's in every community, probably in every community across this country.
You just saw an individual, I think in Miami, get sentenced to 25 years for human trafficking crimes surrounding the Super Bowl a year ago. So these are real cases with real people and real victims, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let me just touch on that a little bit from DHS's perspective, Pam, and I know you were involved in this a little bit and followed this. From what we did at the department is based on what Matt said and President Trump's passion for this, the executive order that he issued. We created the first center for countering human trafficking that had ever been created, not only at the department, but it was also a government-wide entity that helped really consolidate a lot of the resources, both from an investigative standpoint, but also training law enforcement. How could we better support victims, have a victim-centered approach to our work? And so really bringing all that under one roof, which had never really been done before. We had a lot of different components at DHS that were doing some pockets of excellence around human trafficking, but bringing that together under one roof and having that be a resource for the federal government, I think is something I'm very proud of that we did at DHS. I think from what I could tell, the Biden administration is continuing that center. So that's a positive thing, I guess we can say, that they are doing. And so the more I think we can do and talk about it and devote resources to it, I think the better. At the end of the day, whether it's the Department of Justice, whether it's states or whether it's DHS, it's sort of how many resources are you putting to this? You can talk about it. You can talk about it being a bad thing, but unless you're going to sort of back that up with some resources and some effort, then it's all talk and no cow, right? You gotta back it up with some resources.
That's exactly what you did, and what you did as Attorney General, and President Trump cared so deeply about. He called me when our borders were wide open, and we were seeing these caravans of people crossing our borders. And he called me one morning. It was about 9 a.m. and he said, "Can you believe all the children that are being brought across this border to be trafficked?"
Yeah.
And that's a man who gets it, understands, and cares. And I think that's why he put people in these positions who care just as much and devoted the resources to back it up. It is also talking about it very publicly, which I think is why we're doing this, because you have to know the signs. Like you were talking about training law enforcement officers. They have to know. 10 years ago, they didn't know what to look for. Think about that in a human trafficking victim. You know, we've been preaching, all of us, the signs of what to look for. You know, a child who's distracted, doesn't look like they belong with the adult they're with, and so on. So training law enforcement and training the general public. Sure. Do you all remember the flight attendant? I think it was on a flight from maybe Seattle somewhere in California. She saw a flight. She was on a flight. She saw a passenger. And he looked like he did not belong with the little girl who, do you guys remember this, who was sitting next to him? She kept watching. The child got up to go to the bathroom. She ran ahead and put a sticky in the bathroom with a pen and said, "Do you need help?"
Yeah.
That one act broke up an entire act of human trafficking. And that's knowing what to look for. And so that's why I think talking about it and putting the money behind it is so important. And you were talking about the Super Bowl. You know, it's all these big events where they're importing children into our country, or they're taking runaways from within our country domestically, which we saw a lot of in Florida. Right. They're getting them addicted to drugs. You know, it's all multifaceted. They're getting them addicted to drugs. They're putting them on the streets, and they're trafficking them, whether it's any type of huge sporting event or any type of huge convention. That's where people go to traffic kids, and that's why it's so important you put the money behind it, both of you, to train these law enforcement officers and citizens, and frankly, the Johns, to know that if they're picking up a prostitute, it's a good chance that it's a victim of human trafficking and not a consensual encounter.
And you know as well, Pam and Chad, because we all work together, we made sure that the federal, state, and local law enforcement
hand in hand
were coordinating and cooperating. And so many times, I know part of our job was cutting those barricades to collaboration with law enforcement and prosecutors. And so you could have a conversation like Pam would down in Florida with the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, and decide how to attack this organization or these individuals for the maximum result and the maximum punishment for these criminals.
But it also comes back down to leadership, right? So there's a lot of things that the Department of Justice attorneys could be doing, a lot of things that DHS investigators could be investigating, state's AG, right? You got to prioritize human trafficking, exploitation as an issue to make sure that that rises to the top, that you devote the resources. And I feel like that's what President Trump was very good at. He made sure that it was a priority not only for the administration,
always,
but it better be a priority at DHS, Department of Justice, and others. And again, you know, as I watch, you know, the Biden administration, I don't see that same sense of urgency, of prioritization, of saying that this is something that at DHS, you've got a lot of different missions, but you need to prioritize this one. And so I keep coming back to that because I think that demonstrates just a lack of what a priority this is for them.
Because you can say, I'm against human trafficking. Well, we all are. But unless you're out there doing something about it, you know, put your money where your mouth is. And that's what the Trump administration did. And actually still continuing to do afterwards by trying to save lives. You know, if you can save one child's life, it's worth it. And if you start that way, and then law enforcement sees it and citizens see it, and you know you're helping people every single day, it's making a huge difference in this world. And drugs, our drugs are tied into this hand in hand. These coyotes are bringing drugs into our country, all kinds of drugs, and then even domestically, the young people who they're getting to traffic, they're getting them addicted to drugs immediately to keep them doing these horrible things as basically captives. They're human slaves.
Right. And you just don't see the commitment from the liberals in Congress as well to provide the resources. You know, I think about how a U.S. Attorney's Office works, and you have, you know, dedicated, funded positions for certain priorities, and those come from Congress. And you're just seeing that the liberals in Congress right now are not devoting the resources to support these cases and to support law enforcement to do these cases. And so sometimes you have to decide which types of cases you're going to do because of the limited resources. And I believe, and I know you both believe as well, that these cases are the highest priorities, and you do need to assign individuals to specifically work these types of cases.
You know, and Chad, that's what the Trump administration worked so well with state AGs, with state prosecutors doing. Didn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. We all worked together to fight, to combat one of the ugliest things going on in our society. You know, when I became Attorney General, I took a trip that I'll tell you about that changed my life in a minute. But we formed a Human Trafficking Council. I went to the legislature and fought to get tougher laws and laws to protect victims of human trafficking, which is very important too, that victims aren't prosecuted, and also formed a Human Trafficking Council in Florida because we needed resources. We needed to work hand in hand with the federal government, and we needed to build safe houses and do lots of things that many states now in this country still need to do, but it's all about working together, and I think that's what that administration did so well.
So we'll turn to Tanya here in a minute. One thing I wanted to bring up though is, we talk about how terrible human trafficking is. And I think everyone agrees with that. But when you look at what's going on the border, right, it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room. And the elephant is the worst border crisis that we have seen ever in the history of our country is occurring on that border today. And I have to think that the amount of human trafficking, which is in some respects difficult to gauge, difficult to track, you don't really know until you encounter these individuals. But the amount of human trafficking and sex trafficking that we see across that border has most likely skyrocketed more today than we have ever seen before, because you have historic numbers of individuals coming across that border today, some of which are being encountered, a vast majority which are not being encountered. And so when I hear the Biden administration talk about, President Biden, Vice President Harris talk about human trafficking, the little amount that they do, but then their policies allow all of this to occur at the border. And we see a historic number of minors coming across, unaccompanied minors coming across that border. Every one of them is a target for trafficking at some point, whether it's before that border or after the border when they're in the U.S. And so I have a very hard time when I hear about this administration's immigration policy or border security policy to not come back to human trafficking. And it almost seems as though they are not encouraging it, but they are becoming complicit in a lot of the trafficking that's probably taking place today.
And I think these trafficking organizations are exploiting the operational systems that they've put in place at the border to, and it's, I think about how unaccompanied minors are handled, and I just know that these trafficking organizations are building that into their business model to complete their transaction.
So when I was Attorney General, one of the first things I got to do was go to Mexico regarding human trafficking and meet with, there are so many good prosecutors in Mexico who care so much. They took us in Mexico City, there's a beautiful glass wall, and they showed us all etched in this wall. It's huge. Names of missing victims. Missing victims. And they are convinced many of them were taken into our country, and went to a safe house for human trafficking. And we drove in the middle of nowhere for hours. We get out, and without giving details, it was unbelievable. Met so many young women, and their babies having babies as the product of rape. And these young women were there. They had been trafficked, and they're traumatized. They're drug addicted, and a lot of them are babies having babies. They're teenagers with babies. And one woman who I spoke to at length had a beautiful little baby girl named Gabriella, and spoke to her at length. And she was saying that they were telling me about her, that the reason she was able to escape her captor, she learned they were going to import her to the U.S. and send her to New York. And if they did that, what would they do with their baby? Kill their baby. And that's what caused a young, single, drug-addicted mother to escape and get to that safe house. And it's ongoing, it's real. And now, with these borders wide open, it's business is open for these horrible people there.
And after we return from the break, we're going to hear from Tanya Gould, who is a survivor of human trafficking, for her unique perspective on this issue.
We knew that the second term of President Donald J. Trump would make the first look like prelude. Larry, Linda McMahon, and I were forced to confront our optimism and the president's own agenda for the second term and ask ourselves, what's next?
President Trump's making clear he has no intention of fading quietly.
Never, ever quit.
Former Trump administration officials are launching the America First Policy Institute.
and it will focus on America First policy achievements and principles that were implemented successfully during the past 4 years. The think tank will also push back where these policy principles go off course.
What you're seeing today is nothing less than a national debacle.
Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed day in and day out. They need support, they need leadership, and they're simply not receiving any of that from the current administration.
Slow down, everybody.
This Green New Deal mentality that we see in the Democrat Party is coming home to roost now.
This is a 100-year play for the soul of this country, and the America First Policy Institute will lead the way.
Being a part of AFPI, it reminds me when I came to the headquarters of a real war room.
America First means to me that we must remain the beacon of hope. Darkness doesn't even exist when there's light.
We are carrying the torch forward.
America First agenda is all about the American people and bringing power back to the people.
And at the American First Policy Institute, we believe the best is yet to come.
And the best is yet to come.
Learn more at americafirstpolicy.com.
Never, ever quit.
Let me now turn it over to Tanya, who's obviously a survivor of human trafficking and has a very different perspective on all of this versus what we've been talking about so far today. Really glad that you're here, Tanya. Let me have you talk a little bit about your background, but also your work with the federal government, not only during the Trump administration, but I know you continue some of that work today with the Biden folks too. Over to you.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for this discussion, just bringing light and attention, awareness to human trafficking all over the world, but specifically here in the United States is really important. And, to me, that was a difference with the Trump administration. I really believe that in many different ways, and I'll give a couple examples. President Trump really focused on human trafficking in a way where he, people say things all the time, but I believe he took his words and put it into action, and that's love, right? He gave words to and language to, and I just, I don't know if you know this or not, but normally during our the meetings where the president comes and we talk to the president's interagency task force, a survivor can come in from the council and just kind of give a talk, right? Or give some talking points as to what we would like to see. President Trump was the first president to actually have a survivor sit at the table. And what I love specifically about this, he brought a person who was domestically trafficked, and it was myself, to sit around a table. And, I appreciate the work that those who are foreign nationals or have been trafficked here from other countries, I appreciate the work that they have done. But at the same time, I felt like we really need to give a voice to those who have been domestically trafficked, because it's a problem, a real problem, especially when it comes to sex trafficking here in our own country. And President Trump really gave voice to that. Another thing he did is he really, just a leader is one who brings others with them. A lot of leaders have been meaningful, and they're a lot of leaders are meaningful in a way that they take the initiative, but a lot of these initiatives aren't far-reaching. And unless you bring survivors to the table, from conception to implementation, you're only going to get so far. And President Trump understood that. And so whereas, with the Biden administration, when he's talking about the national plan, he talks about bringing survivors to the table, which survivors are are already at the table, because President Trump did that, right? So you see a lot of language, when it's talking about equity. Well, we were already working on that. We had the underserved committee. I'm just so folks know, I serve on the United States Advisory Council for Human Trafficking, both with the Trump administration and now with the Biden administration. And so, these are things that were already happening because we had great partnership. And, when us as survivors, especially survivor leaders, when we look to see where we've come, from in the last 5 years, we've made great movement. And thank you, President Trump, for really, setting a standard on getting down to what's going on and having this coordination happen within the United States of America. And that's important. So that's what we're seeing different now. We're seeing survivors really taking the movement, taking the spaces at the table and helping our allies so that we're really getting to the bottom of this and, addressing child sex trafficking here in our own country. It's an issue. So I also mentor kids who have been identified as being trafficked at our local children's hospital. And, we have way too many kids. We need more mentors. We need more therapists. We need, more coordination within our communities. And, we need more models on how to do this. There's such a need for really, honestly, like we were talking earlier about the Center to Combat Human Trafficking. We need more of this, but on a local level. Right. So here's a great model on a national level to say, hey, we have to bring this stuff together so that everyone's speaking the same language, that we are, coming up with great policy and we know what's working and not working because we're having conversations about it. We're talking about it. We're going to make mistakes. So what happened? And then show a model of this so it can happen on the state and local level. And so so thank you for this conversation today. And I'm here. I'm passionate about it. Go ahead.
Tanya, on behalf of everyone at AFPI, thank you for what you're doing. I mean, as a survivor and being so brave to come out and help others, that's truly, that's rare. What you're doing, you're saving lives, and you're also telling other victims who will be survivors that you can do it because you did it, and you're a strong woman out there helping other women and men and children. So thank you so much for doing this and for helping our country. And, you mentioned something, and I know we all believe that it was during the Trump administration that such a spotlight was put on human trafficking, and that's so important. And because you know the most about domestic human trafficking, tell us a little bit about that in your opinion, and that about how many people you feel are trafficked domestically, and that it's more common than people know or want to believe. Is that correct?
Yes, especially during COVID. It is so important that, our communities understand that traffickers, it's their job to keep their business going. And so COVID helped them with that because kids were they're going to school online. We don't even, we're just showing up for work and, we can, turn our camera off. Kids were doing the same thing, but they were online and traffickers had them right where they wanted them. And so our numbers went up drastically in our human trafficking cases with kids. And another thing that we saw at our children's hospital is that the age of kids being trafficked has dropped. I mean, it was just normal now to have kids coming in 10, 11, and 12. And they're this is happening to them. And so, it's important to, for parents to know what their kids are watching and listening to, and, what type of apps they have on their phones, and the friends that they're, because remember back in the day, we just went to our neighbor's house. We had to come in at, by the time it was dark. But, today, kids are friends with someone in Japan because of the internet. And so parents have to really figure out how to still manage and supervise their kids. And so it's when it comes to drug use, when it comes to, now the legalization or the access to is what I want to say of marijuana, it's, it's really becoming a problem, when now we have kids coming in who not only has been trafficked, but they have an addiction to marijuana. And so it's something that we're going to have to talk about. We don't talk about child sex trafficking enough. We have not dealt with child sexual abuse enough. And that's why we are where we are today. So unless, and I heard someone say earlier, unless we begin to have these conversations and meaningful conversations about it, we're going to continue to go backwards.
And do you believe,
lot of
Tanya,
work have done.
Do you believe that a lot of parents think, I came across a lot of parents in Florida who thought, this can never happen to me. This can never happen to my child. And that's why what you're doing is so important. And that's why I think the resources have to be put behind it.
And can I ask one?
Often think that, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Tanya, thanks for joining us. I just think this adds such a great perspective. But the question I have is, we have a real heavy law enforcement angle here, but I know you have a lot of visibility as to, especially what the victims need for services after the organization is broken up. Why don't you just talk just a little bit, we only have a few minutes, but just a little bit about those resources for victims and how important those are to begin the healing process.
Yeah, it's important for, whether it's a child or an adult, when they've been identified as being trafficked, just think about that first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's like a fire. It's like putting a fire out. You have law enforcement, you have medical, you have shelter, and so it is important for all of these services to be trauma informed and have it as a practice, not just something in your head, but you're actually practicing. And we do not have enough of those. We do not have, and that's when we're talking about coordinated efforts, that's what we need. So these first 2 weeks, because, I want to get the trafficker too. But when someone is being identified, they have to understand this themselves. So the pressure to testify, the pressure to get on their feet is great, right? The pressure to trust the services that they're being supported with, that pressure is great. We're asking them to go from being controlled in this situation, and some of them are unaware that they were being trafficked, coming into an awareness of where they actually are. That's mind-boggling, but that's our role as trauma-informed service providers, is to hold their hand, walk them through this process so they can get the correct services and that we can really get their trafficker. So we need to make sure that they know that they feel safe. That's important when it comes to law enforcement, comes to interviewing, it's just the forensic part. We need to make sure that they feel safe, right? That's a law enforcement job. Right? Because we've been told that law enforcement, they don't care about you,
Well, I think that's important. I think it's important for you to bring up, and I'm glad you have, because as, running departments and agencies from a law enforcement perspective, we want to solve the problem. Yeah. We want to attack the criminal, the trafficker, put them in jail, get them off the streets, solve the problem. But, what I think we have to walk that fine line is understanding it from the victim's perspective. Yeah. How much and how far and how quickly can they go to helping law enforcement do that? And what should law enforcement be cognizant of as they're interfacing with victims of trafficking? So, Tanya, thank you again for your perspective. It's always very critical to get a survivor's perspective versus a law enforcement. We've got to combine and marry the two when we're going after this issue. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you all for having me. And it's been just amazing talking through some of these issues and, bringing awareness. So I hope we get to do this again.
Let me thank each of our participants today. January is Human Trafficking Month, and I think it's always important to talk about human trafficking during the month of January, but it's equally as important to talk about human trafficking every day, every month of the year. This is an issue that deserves the attention. This is an issue that is near and dear to many of our hearts as former officials heading law enforcement agencies. But I want to thank the survivors, all the people that are part of addressing this very, very important issue, again, from survivors to the law enforcement officials that are doing this. So this is a fight that we can win. It just takes a lot of dedication. It takes resources. But most of all, it takes leadership. And it's leadership from the federal government, from President Biden and this administration that we currently aren't seeing that we hope in the days and years to come they will find that leadership and they will find new initiatives to take on this issue. So thank you.